Okay, so today's April 24th, 2022, and this is our Western Desiderata Extinctionati meeting, and meeting 106, and we'll be having a presentation on the history of climate collapse from ice going south. So if you want to get started with that.
Yeah, you want me to start right away?
Sure, yeah.
Let's go. Let's run button. Okay, yeah, so I found on the Just Collapse blog on Friday, I found this quote that I wanted to, start it all off with. And it's global modern techno-industrial civilization is now collapsing, having destroyed and consumed the very things that enabled it. A stable climate, flourishing ecosystems, biodiversity, and energy-rich fossil fuels. So kind of the key phrase here is now collapsing, the verb time of that. So I just wrote down a few things about what this means and what do we mean by these words and blah, 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 right? So first of all, when I talk about climate collapse, this is sort of the boring intro thing. When I talk about climate collapse, I'm really talking about climate-induced societal collapse, right? So because I don't think it makes any sense to say that climate itself collapses. It can go wet and windy and wild and crazy back and forth with cold and hot weather and stuff, but yeah, I don't think there's a case for the climate in itself collapsing. So when I anyway talk about climate collapse, it's the collapse of civilization due to climate. Right, so when is a system in collapse? For instance, the Greenland ice sheet. Physically, when that system is past its tipping point, also called the point of no return. And what is always said about tipping points in the climate is that they are easier to see in the rear view window. When we have passed them, we can sort of say, that's where it happened, right? And when it comes to the Greenland ice sheet, because that was only in 2019 that a science report came out that put the Greenland ice sheet collapse to around 2001, 2000. So that's when it went into not an irresistible, but a irreversible collapse. Yeah. So what happens when an ice sheet goes into collapse is that it's first very, very sort of level, very slowly, almost indetectable, that is starting to tip over and lose more and more. But of course, in the beginning, it doesn't lose very much. It's almost impossible to see. You can only see it when the graph has come like 10 or 20 years down the line. Then you see, something happened up there, right? Yeah, the system after the tipping point, the system has shift to a new stable state. And the new stable state then is like Greenland with no ice, and the ice sheet collapses. The ice sheet collapse process starts immediately. So it started to collapse, but it may take maybe 100 years before it's free of ice. So it's interesting to talk about what collapse means, because to many of us, we don't think about things taking hundreds of years as a collapse. We've watched too much movies, too much Hollywood, and things go boom, and there's a huge explosion, and that's that. And afterwards, it's only rubble. But here, if you trigger the collapse of the Antarctica or Greenland ice sheet, what you do is you switch it over to a constantly losing more and more ice state, right? And you're already in collapse here in Greenland, in on the ice sheet, but it's not gone. It's still there, but but it's in collapse. So that's and it takes like 100 years. Because huge amounts of ice have to be melted and run into the fjords, but it's unstoppable in principle. So you have the classic wine glass tipping over on the table and falling to the floor example. So that's the principle, but then there it takes 5 seconds from your trigger collapse until you have wine and glass bits all over the floor. And for the Greenland ice sheet, it takes 100 years. But it's kind of the same thing. Once you trigger it, it falls to the floor and breaks, and the fluid goes all over the floor. And you can't bring it back. Like you can't get the glass together and the wine inside the glass. It's destroyed, right? So yeah, so I've listed according to time when it happens. Then you first have the Keeling curve. That's the curve that an American scientist set up to measure the CO2 on Mauna Loa in Hawaii. That systematic measuring was set up in the late 50s. And then we had satellites and stuff to measure sea ice collapse. And in my opinion anyway, the sea ice collapse triggered the ice sheet collapse. Remember the ice sheets are on land, on the in the mountains, like Antarctica and Greenland. And those two ice collapses in the sea and on land, they are already triggering, and they trigger more and more weather system collapses. And it's the same thing with the weather systems. They don't really collapse, but they go crazy into another kind of weather system. We still have weather, even though it's crazy, But those weather system collapses are going to increasingly lead to agricultural and societal collapses, because even though we are on the internet, we still got to eat. Everybody has to eat, and where does that food come from when all the fields are flooded or dried out, and the thing. Okay, so we shouldn't think that the Greenland ice collapse is bad for the people in Greenland specifically, or for the animals in Greenland or whatever. It's that's missing the point. The point is that these systems are linked, and what that means is that ice sheets that theoretically were not yet in collapse would go into collapse as things played out. So one area of ice on the sea triggers a collapse of ice on land, and then that triggers the loss of the Arctic cell for weather system circulations and stuff. And so all of these pieces are sort of interlocking. And yeah, it's not like seals and polar bears and Eskimos or Inuits are having a bad time. It's more like the Greenland piece of the climate puzzle is a big, important piece, and I would spell hard times for everybody living all the places around Greenland. Maybe even Greenland people and animals will have a easier time. You know, it's like so-called what do you call that? Remote influence in a way, because when the Greenland ice sheet melts down, the whole global sea levels goes up, and then that triggers the melting of Antarctica, because those ice edges slide inwards, so the seawater goes down under the ice and starts melting the ice from below on the Antarctic continent. Teleconnections is the word I was looking for. Right. Okay, I'm soon finished. When could we have done something? That's an important question. Yeah, I'll return to that. I'll go back up to the Keeling curve. So the thing is that when you are going to pinpoint a sea ice collapse or an ice sheet collapse, you have to sort of wait 10 or a dozen of years till you can see that on the curve as a continued downhill slope for the amount of ice. So the statistical graph or curve is kind of what gives the collapse away. And if you look, for instance, on Wikipedia for climate tipping points, then the sort of king tipping point, the first tipping point, according to many, is the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, which is what the Keeling curve is measuring. And if you see in the Keeling curve, it goes, yeah, you have an annual cycle that is like this, but it still goes up faster than exponential, actually. There is something called faster than exponential, but the thing is that it goes faster and faster every year, basically. And whenever you see a curve like that in nature, it means that something is not in balance. I think we can agree about. So I made two attempts for me writing these notes, and I just put away the first one because I was trying to find a later tipping point or a later initiation of the collapse. But the thing is, we have to go back to the late 50s, 1950s, when the Keeling curve was first drawn based on measurements. So, of course, they had to wait a couple of years to see if it went up or down because they just started measuring in 58, right? So they didn't know immediately that it was a sign of collapse or a sign of a steep increase. But when we can look at it in hindsight today, the Keeling curve, it means that this climate system that allows us to make the food and have the lives that we are having now, that climate system was already out of kilter, out of balance. So we have to go at least back to 1958 for sort of, oh, could we have stopped it then? Could we have done something else? Could we have chosen other policies and stuff? That's sort of all the way back to the 1950s, and I would guess, maybe the 1940s, 30s, because here's what I think. I don't think people start measuring random stuff in the atmosphere, which costs like thousands and thousands of dollars without any reason. When you shoot up satellites and measure the ice and stuff, it's because you have a pretty good idea that something is happening to the ice, right? It's not kind of random stuff where you spend millions of dollars and science grants to measure. So I would guess that Keeling himself only set up those measurements because he had a pretty good hunch that there was something going on with the CO2 concentration. Okay, so that's when we have done something. That would have to be like our grandparents would have had to do something, but they also didn't know. They were just trying to learn how to drive their car and stuff, and happy to fly on their first intercontinental flight. Had no idea, basically, that things were going wrong. So, a literary quote. This is a dialogue from Ernest Hemingway's 1926 novel, The Sun Also Rises. How did you go bankrupt? Bill asked. Two ways, Mike said. Gradually and then suddenly. So that's kind of how this ice and climate triggered collapse of civilization started. For maybe hundreds of years, it was almost impossible to see that it was happening at all because it was going so very slow at the beginning, and then as these feedbacks and effects go faster and faster, you start to see, okay, so now it's going down, right? But it's like the way somebody goes bankrupt. It's like everything goes at once. And there's a complete detachment between how the physical systems are working or indicating, and our human realization, the social realization of these things. There are some people who go around thinking that, oh, but in 2018 when Greta came about, then so many people were out in the streets and with their science and stuff, and it's fantastic. So this is, and they abuse the word tipping point and saying this is a tipping point for our social awareness of these things. But the thing is that when even not even a majority of people realize this and start jamming the squares and stopping traffic and stuff in protest, that only means that it's way too late, because these are very slowly developing things that take like decades and decades to become visible. And when it's so visible that even your daughter and your grandmother understands these things, and it's basically too late, because then then the exponential increase in the problem is so large that you would have to invent a time machine basically to stop it. Another element is that you had the big oil climate research. They were big on researching climate effects of oil and gas in the 1960s. And of course, they also concluded that, oh, yeah, this is a big deal, this is a huge problem. But then they chose to not publicize that, or chose to sort of keep that on a quiet basis. But they've known since the 1960s, because they had so much money, so they hired the best climate or atmospheric scientists in the world and found this thing. And my guess would be that they found that, okay, it was too late anyway, so why not make a good buck from this thing, instead of ruining the whole oil business without even being able to stop it anyway. So that's kind of my guess. So in summary, it's a long, flat start of collapse, and it's sort of the tragedy of the slow start, because it's the kind of threat that is too boring and slow for humans or for societies to detect. and like with the big oil research, uh, my judgment is that now we're into narrative control. So governments and corporations in general have sort of weighed two things against each other. Should we do something about this climate running wild and the collapsing society eventually, or should we just pretend that we're doing something about it? And one thing is immensely expensive and more or less impossible even in the 1960s. And the other thing is like, yeah, just throw some money to some PR groups or some spin doctors and make a Paris meeting, Paris agreement that comes up with a random number of degrees that is supposed to be our societal limit for what we can allow, but it's in no way linked to the hard physics of it. It's not a tipping point. It's an long after tipping point temperature limit, the 2 degrees. So it's just a feel-good thing that, oh yeah, maybe we can keep it below 2 degrees. But most people hearing that or reading it, they believe that, okay, if we keep it below 2C, then it won't go higher than 2C 50 years later, and nothing bad will happen. It's all kind of a narrative control and an attempt to not start a panic, I would say. So that's my messy, chaotic presentation. Somebody else say something, please.
Thank you very much. No, it is not messy. It is nice to have a timeline. Actually, it's a good reminder. You didn't talk about the Himalaya. I don't understand much what's happening there. Do you have information about that?
Can you remind me of what about the Himalaya?
Well, the glaciers and the ice of the Himalaya, is it collapsing as fast as what you have in the Arctic?
Well, so the thing I heard about was that there was some kind of scandal that the IPCC had said something that was not correct or something. I can't really remember. But the thing is that all the mountain glaciers that are not ice sheets are also melting, increasingly fast due to all kinds of stuff like ash from forest fires and warmer winds and more rain instead of snow and stuff. So it's like I think the most important thing about the Himalayan glaciers is that they provide the fresh water for billions, literally
Yeah.
billions of people downstream who grow rice and all kinds of stuff and wheat. So we have sort of 3 or 4 billion people living downstream from Himalaya. So that in itself is a huge hunger and mass death situation. Yeah. So
Thanks.
My only comment is that, well, it echoes what Lord Hugh had titled his videos towards the latter portion. There's no escape, and also that he said that the governments must know the immensity of the problem, and because of the immensity, there is really nothing that can be done, and so that's why they're not doing anything. And so his analysis was that XR had a strategy of trying to plead with the governments to do something, but they really can't. So it's kind of futile, that type of strategy. Well, that's not my only comment. I also noticed that it was great for your definition of climate collapse. It's not the climate that's collapsing, although maybe the climate patterns are. But you had said that um, civilization is collapsing due to climate changes, but also not only will civilization collapse or is collapsing, but habitat for other creatures who are not civilized, like animals and non-industrialized peoples. That's my comment.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And it reminds me, I had another document where I wrote something about that the climate was only 1 out of 5 or 10 different things that eventually would come and collapse civilization. For instance, the ecological collapse with animals and insects and stuff, and fish species and stuff going extinct or becoming much smaller in numbers. But the thing that got to us first out of those was the climate, and so we are already in the climate-induced societal collapse, and that's kind of why I and other people focus on the climate, because I don't worry about the number 20 thing that would have caused civilization collapse down the road in 100 years, when we're already here, and we could already have famine in a year or 5 years due to the climate, right? Of course, you have other things like war, which has always been with us humans, but it wouldn't be so severe and so devastating with the war in Ukraine if everything else was going okay, right? Um, yeah, that's basically it, I think. Yeah. Excuse me. I was also going to say something about why different groups of people say the things they say in the climate debate. So we've already touched on the governments and the corporations. They have chosen to pretend that they take it seriously, but they do nothing, right? Because, like you said, some people who looked into it from the government found out, okay, we can only scratch the surface here. We're not going to stop this freight train anyway. But if we do, so basically that's why they're not even trying, because it's too large a problem, too big of a problem. And then you have activist groups like the XR and stuff, and if you come too close to them with your arguments or my arguments about collapse and tipping points, they will sort of repel you like a magnet and say that no, 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 we still have agency, we still have something we can do as humans, and they would say that, right? They have to say that there is something we can do, because their whole idea is to go out and do stuff. Their whole idea is to go out in the street and demand something or other. So it's like what people say is, and what agenda people have is connected to what they want to achieve and what kind of thing they are. And then you have most normal people who are not in those groups. They will kind of say, yes, it's serious, and we should buy a new car, which is electrical instead of gasoline and stuff, and I should go use my bicycle more, and all kinds of these little small things that are totally inadequate for changing the entire planet or the entire society. So they would go on doing these small fixes and feel good about themselves. So they basically say and do things in order to feel good about themselves. And I have people in my family, who are kind of doing that and maybe reaching out and saying, "Oh, look what I'm doing. I'm doing this thing, and aren't you proud to see that your old mother are doing these kind of things?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah." But uh, yeah, and I remember growing up when I was at high school, my mother would have this sticker on her car with like ecology and development, blah blah blah, on her car window, and it's like just that thing to drive around in a gasoline sucking car with a sticker about some kind of green initiative. It's kind of, yeah, contradictory. So basically, for people who don't spend much time thinking about politics or the climate or whatever, they just want to know as little as possible about these things in order to still be able to feel good about themselves and feel that they are the good guys, that they're on the right side, and they will take whatever kind of citizen initiative that comes along in order to feel that they are doing something. Yeah, that's basically the main groups. I'm not going to go into the deniers because everybody is a denier in some way, the way I see it. People who change their bicycle or change their car, I think that's enough, are basically in denial. So sort of the pure science denying climate deniers, I'm not going to go into it even because they're kind of a dying culture anyway. So they're going to eat themselves as time goes by, I think.
As you were mentioning the dreaded XR, I was hoping that Gary might be on the call, but for Australia, it's quite difficult for him to attend at this time, because he was going to talk to Faulty about the ARG, and as you know, we cancelled the meeting after Hugh passed because we were not able to do it, and then I think he would like to conclude that. So there's none of us who can take on an ARG. None. I mean, I hardly understand them. It was all in Hugh's head. I was talking to Mike about it earlier. So I think Gary is going to kind of either write or have a talk with Faulty. He asked me, would I come on the talk? I said, why not? Because just to have a bit of backup, Yeah, I mean, we all that was in Hugh's head, and we can't. We have the document that Hugh had written about the utilization, how to use NOG for activism. I think I can't remember the exact title of the document, but I think we have given it to Faulty, or if we haven't, we will. But I mean, that's all we can do, and I don't even know what XR is doing at the moment. I don't know, are they still even a thing? Does anybody know what's going on that line? Because I have lost interest.
Yeah, I think what Faulty, should I use that name? I think what's a part of XR is doing is that they are in the new campaign for April that is Just Stop Oil. But their big problem is that other things happen in the world. You have the big conflict with Russia and a new situation for gas and oil stuff. And it's being used, maybe they planned it that way, but anyway, in any case, it's being used as an argument for England to pump more oil in the North Sea, have developed new oil fields, and the same in America and in Norway. They're kind of sidelining the activists and saying, no, we have to produce more oil, 30 or 40 more years and stuff. So the whole initiative to have a Just Stop Oil campaign that came from the XR milieu is flopping just because of bad timing. I think it's the worst timing for that kind of campaign for at least the past decade, because there's an oil price and energy price in Europe and America that is going crazy. So and I followed with half an eye. I followed the success of the April Rebellion in London, etc. And it's kind of not creating the waves that they were hoping for. You had the April 2019 rebellion that was hugely successful when they blocked 5 bridges in London at the same time and stuff, and held it for a week or something. That was really great, and even my old cynical self felt kind of optimistic around that time, but it seems that it's flopping now. Maybe other people have more information about it.
I might
Yeah.
say something here as
go ahead.
the UK representative about, I feel like, I don't know. I've got no idea what XR does or is doing or any of that stuff. I don't know what to think about it. I don't know if there's any point to it. I'm useless in following any sort of activism here, just in case you were wondering what someone on the ground in London is thinking. I really don't think anything about any of this stuff. Well, except I keep seeing these clips where I guess I generally like the activists who are involved. Like you mentioned the Just Stop Oil thing. I think they're all cool. I'm not active in any way. I don't like human beings enough to get involved with them. I highly admire these people who sort of chain themselves to oil trucks and stuff. And, I sort of support anybody who wants to do more or less anything to interdict the activities of modern civilization. At the same time, I think there's almost zero possibility that these kind of activities are going to get any support from the general public, because everybody's in denial. And I have this general model of people walking into the gas chambers, insisting that they're showers, and that's all you can ever hope for humanity. I don't know if that's cynical enough or too much.
Well, I mean, as your presentation was showing us, Torstein, is that climate is causing societal collapse, civilization collapse. As we have been talking about this for a couple of years, we need to see that this collapse happens faster in order to protect what A was saying, the non-human living beings and the humans who are not living in the civilization that we know. So I don't see the point of any activism like XR to try to stop oil or stuff like that. I actually more looking into what is accelerating the collapse of this civilization with great hope. And I think this is what we should start to look at. What are the main factors that, beside war, pandemics, we've had 2 years of acceleration I think with the COVID crack, and now this war is also playing in the playing a bit the same role as our comrade COVID in a certain way. I don't know. Do you agree with me on this, or am I right? Am I kind of?
Yeah. Oh no, Sophie. I think I just wanted to comment on XR, and we've always noticed this, and I think everyone is starting to see they're always a step behind. Step behind during COVID, now during the war. It seems like every action they want to take is their own action, and they don't take into account the economics, world events, world health events, and it's a bit childish. They say, "Oh, I want to do this action, and I don't care how people will react. This is because we want to do this. We want to block roads. We want to stop oil." But they don't understand the repercussions of that. They don't. I mean, do they have somebody who it's a critique that they're not strategizing properly. If they have their goals and their aims, I don't think they're doing it appropriate. I mean, I don't think it's effective, and that's what we've always been harping on, and that's what XR Med. Well, that's why we made XR Med, right? And so we had to look at other avenues, and I agree, Sophie. Maybe there's other groups out there, but yeah, I'm on the same boat to look at that direction. Yeah, definitely.
Well,
It feels like
it's about ego. It's about ego. It's nearly everybody in there. Sorry, Bob.
well, no, I mean, I think probably that, and the fact that they're people who fundamentally believe in the system, if you pardon me for using that term. They're basically Guardian readers who ultimately want or ultimately believe that this kind of whatever I think that most of us already think of as a joke, but that we live in this sort of democracy where you're going to vote for some MP who's going to sort things out. If you could just sort of persuade them to believe the right things, or just persuade them or force them to behave in the right way, and basically from Faulty all the way down, who again I don't have any deep knowledge of those characters, but I just get the impression that they're people who basically believe in the sort of model of society that's represented since the last 150 years of people going to work in offices and voting in elections and buying ready meals in Marks and Spencer, and those are the people, and unless basically those people are completely irrelevant now. I mean, insofar as I'm a middle-class Londoner, at the end of the day, I'm irrelevant as well, but at least I can tell. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, I don't think Faulty is a liberal. I think as Hugh had very, very well analysed his character, you could see that Faulty was a doomer, and that he was absolutely aware that there was absolutely no escape, I think.
But then he still feels like he needs to sell it to the Guardian readers.
Yeah, but he's surrounded with a lot of people who are not like in and I don't know enough XR, but what I know is the militants. I don't know the people who are looking after the leaders, but all the militants I've come in contact with have an enormous ego problem, and they have, as you said, they want to do something about a cause, and they have absolutely no strategy, as you said, Mike. They are not taking into account any politics, any events that are happening in the world. Nothing. They just have these sort of little plans and little targets, and so we might as well forget about any of these organizations at the moment, because they're a bit of a waste of time, and they're not going to bring down things fast enough. That's not what they want to do. They want to,
Yeah, I would like to pick up the keyword of acceleration. I think you mentioned that, Sophie, and I think the way I understand it anyway, the acceleration of this path or this course towards collapse, towards visible collapse of societies. Anyway, we are already in it, but for things really to shut down, is already being provided by nature, the way I understand it. And back in 2019, I think I was on a panel debate with you and 5 other doomers or something, and I had a lot of doubt about even using a depth strike, student depth strike or whatever, in order to accelerate the downfall of Western civilization. Because partly is because if you do something like that, you become responsible in a way, and you become responsible both for the predictable outcome and the unpredictable outcomes of what you're doing, right? So I both don't want to go into a social acceleration movement for these things, because it's just too scary and too dangerous, and it's too much responsibility, I feel. And also I don't think that bit would have been a big decider anyway. I think we're criticizing XR for not making a change, not making enough of a splash. But I don't think a depth strike or a sabotage action somewhere or anything really that we could do in order to accelerate things would accelerate the climate-induced collapse enough to go faster than nature is already accelerating these things. So that's my understanding anyway, and I've started to produce some graphs based on NASA data for the big ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland, and the exponential shape of those graphs for Antarctica in particular. And that's that's kind of satisfying in a way, to get some kind of numbers on it, and to see how fast it's going, and to find out that Antarctica has in the past 2-3 years gone past Greenland in how much ice it melts every day or every year. So Antarctica is a big one, and when they really get their act together down there, it's really going to go fast. And so just following a sort of made-up race in my own head, a race between Greenland and Antarctica, and see who melts faster. That's kind of action in my nerdy little head. And gathering the data when it's published and turning it into a graph and presenting it on Twitter and YouTube and stuff. That's what I do anyway, because I like to have the numbers on things. I like to make graphs of things that nobody else makes graphs for. To me, it's the most exciting and what do you call it? Most crucial and exciting development in the world in 1,000 years. But apparently other people don't think so, and don't produce those graphs, not even NASA itself or NOAA. But I'll just keep doing that and prioritizing the things that I think are super interesting. Anyway.
Going south, I see your point about the scariness of, if we're saying that, okay, let's accelerate the collapse of civilization, because it will certainly affect all of us. It's not just going to affect the others but us. But at the same time, the longer, one can argue that the longer one waits and just let things proceed as they are, how much of nature will be left? How much of a habitat will be left? And so one's kind of in a catch-22 where, yeah, it's too scary to accelerate collapse, but at the same time, if we don't, let's think about the other side is also getting a lot of time to prepare whatever um, macabre or evil plans they have, which Lord Hugh termed as managed extinction. What do they're gaining time on, or they're gaining time on whatever plans they have for the rest of us. So so there's that point too.
Yeah, and then I just want to add to that. He also mentioned that whatever comes out in the future, if everything, we don't know what the future holds, but in the present time, like, did he say eating up our soul, eating up our inside, while we know and see everything that's going on in the world? Are we okay? I mean, we as in individual, or as we, who you are you okay just seeing things as they are? Or are you, I guess that's how it is. Like, are you okay watching in the sidelines, or do you want to participate, or just something to consider?
And I feel if you have, like we were saying, we said that very often in meetings, that we have to collapse before the collapse happens. That we have to live as if it's already happened. I think that's a state of mind. But also, I'm trying to understand, Tostin, what you mean by responsibility, because responsibility for what? If you participate in a debt strike, for example, and you see the financial system of your country going to shambles, and you realize that people are getting ruined and money has no more value, and I don't know what scenario could happen, but okay, so where does your responsibility lie when you've participated in the debt strike? Because you're not on your own, number one. And you're responsible for what? You're responsible for some people losing money. Can you elaborate on the responsibility?
Sure. Yeah, there's sort of two things, as I said. The one thing is that I don't think our ability to do anything is as great as we think. We tend to think as humans that everything depends on us, and we choose good and bad. We are gods. So that's the one thing that I think what Greenland is doing is much bigger deciding factor for how fast it goes. Acceleration is all about how fast things develop. So I'm kind of graphing and watching how fast it develops from the natural side. Anyway, the other thing is, like, there are tens of thousands of tribes and people and civilized countries and people that I don't even know about. And if I do a small thing up here or in Europe or something, it's kind of like the butterfly effect. So maybe there will be thousands of people in Tuvalu or something not growing up or losing their imported medical equipment or whatever, because things collapse because of successful action that I took part in. So it's kind of, if you're going to play God in the way that acceleration kind of is, that you are closing down this way of life, or trying to, then you have to, I feel that you have to have a pretty good picture of all the known consequences and all the unknown, unfortunate consequences of what you're doing. That's what I'm talking about with responsibility. I think I would have to use a decade to look into all of those things before I could do something like that, you know. But I support Mother Nature, and I understand why she's doing this, and I'm not gonna try and stop what she's doing, because I think it's basically about self-defense, you know, about saving all these animals and fishes and plants and all this paradisical. You say paradisical or paradisical? Save this paradise that was the earth before civilized humans. So I'm all for that, but I won't kind of put the shoe in the machine or something. Not because it's illegal, because I'm totally okay with doing illegal things if it's a good thing, but I can't be sure that it's a good thing, or that it's more good than bad. And I think everything we as humans, or I as a person, is doing or is going to do is a moral issue or a moral question. So if you do something in order to achieve something, then you should have a pretty good picture of the consequences.
Unless you do it just because it's the right thing to do at the moment when you think of doing it. But it's a bit of a catch-22. You're right. Yeah. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Do you know? If you can be responsible for things if you don't do anything. You can be responsible for things if you do certain things. So
yeah,
you know.
Yeah, I don't think you can ever know the full consequences of whatever action you're taking. That idea that you can is what got us here in the first place. The idea that everything could be predictable based on the actions that we take. But yeah, like you're saying, the actions you don't take are the exact same thing. And I think if you look at where all of this is going, if no one does anything, that's a pretty dismal future. So to need to have some kind of accounting knowledge or whatever of how this will affect everyone, I don't think is the best way to look at it. You're never going to know how everything is going to turn out. Like you said, the butterfly effect is totally real. Maybe something you do would have all kinds of consequences you couldn't predict. But yeah, I don't think it's about playing God as much as it is sort of playing your role. If you know something is wrong and you can do something against it, regardless of what may come of that, I think that's sort of the imperative. I'm not advocating anything in particular, but just sort of the way to think about things is to do right action, just for the sake of doing what's right. If you know that this whole system is wrong, doing stuff sort of against it could be construed as right.
Yeah, I just was reminded that not doing something or just continuing doing what we do now, like driving around in cars and flying around in planes, we know the consequences of those things, and in my view anyway, the consequences of that is societal collapse, which I've personally come to see it as a thing we should want, because it's sort of evil and destructive. So that's another piece of the acceleration puzzle, that actually in this very specific case not doing, in quotes, or just keeping on living like we do, actually goes towards the goal, in quotes, of collapsing the system. And because as a society we don't care, and it's an accelerating, exponential climate-induced collapse.
Yeah,
I mean,
thanks for explaining that, what you meant by responsibility. But it's a good discussion, and it also reminds me of some of the people who think about having some kind of a carbon budget. You've probably come across that, GS, in all your years being an environmental follower or activist.
Right now. Go for it.
So there was a blogger, his blog was named Green with a Gun, and he talked about I think it was maybe I can't remember the exact number, but is it the 2000 ton or 2 ton carbon lifestyle? You can correct me. So he was trying to live within a budget that, okay, I can only take this many trips, I can go on the train every this many times in a year. So that was one way of him trying to live within what he thought was the environmental budget that he had. So he can only eat this much meat. He can only, I mean, it's kind of a very restrictive way to live, but in a way, it's setting limits for oneself, right? Like you can't just gorge yourself on every consumer's thing that's being dangled in front of you if you have some limit like that. So what do you think of that approach to dealing with the resources?
I think it's wrong in so many ways, at least two ways. First, it's a very individualized American kind of way that
He was from New Zealand or Australia.
Yeah, okay, sorry, but it's the same kind of country, you know. So it's like me and my friend, we can save everything by not buying plastic bags or whatever. It's kind of crazy. And the other way it's crazy is because I thought you were going to talk about the climate budgets that the governments pretend that we have, as a species on this planet, and even those are crazy because what I said in my little presentation, we're way past the point of no return on these things. And the what do you call it? The carbon budget that we made up for the Paris party in 2015 or something, they are based on a willful ignorance of feedback mechanisms, a willful ignoring of methane in the Arctic and stuff, all kinds of things that we keep out of the equation in order to pretend that we still have a budget, a carbon budget. And it's also based on the 2 degrees Celsius warming, fake limit. So all of these things are inside of what I call the narrative rescue operation or whatever. The governments are using an optimistic narrative instead of trying to fix the thing.
And what do you think about? You mentioned also that sabotage actions too are not really your cup of tea. When you mentioned first debt strike as an example, what would you think about the type of action, for example, described in Edward Abbey's The Monkey Wrench Gang, where people are doing something just because out of love for trees, out of love for a valley, or actions like the guys from Deep Green Resistance who go and occupy a site because they want to protect a beautiful place in North Dakota that's going to be mined. What would be your position on actions of sabotage or blockage of the kind?
Absolutely. Totally in favor of it. And the FBI and CIA and Pinkerton and stuff already know what I've done already, just in my younger years. So we were over in the woods of England in the Newbury bypass action. We were totally being surveyed by, all the time being surveyed by Pinkerton, private detectives and stuff. And yeah, some of the greatest people I've met in my life were in those forest actions. So I'm absolutely for protecting, and the more specific it is, like this river with these trouts and this salmon and stuff, just protect it. And like I'm not sure if it's Derek who says it or somebody else, but it's like, if we can just protect this river and this species of trout for 5 or 10 more years till the rest of society collapses, then we may have achieved something big, So I'm all for that. The only thing I'm skeptical of is like, I don't understand the economy at all, and doing something against the whole economic system just seems very, very muddy or hard to predict for me. So I wouldn't do that kind of thing. And also, I'm a writer, so I'm going to have some pretty hardcore sabotage actions in my upcoming novel. So, but me personally, no, I'm sort of too old and too clumsy to try anything like that. But I won't stop other people from doing it.
But I think you had made a very good description of the debt strike in some expose and meetings with us, and he's a guy who had a great knowledge of economy, and I'm like you, but I forced myself actually because of this tendency to kind of look down on finance and find it boring, and and I've started to understand why using the weaknesses of this system, of this financial system, can bring certain things about that would I don't know if it's looking for a result really, but to bring a bit more chaos in the game and a bit more unrest, and it's I think it is a form of sabotage too. Once it's like, if you know how an engine works, you know how the financial system works, you know where the weak points are, you know how I don't know, a digger machine works, you know where to put something to stop it from working. I think more along that way, without doing the alien cortex thing where we say, what's happening? Routing for Marine tonight in the French election. Oh, well, sorry to say, but that horrible Macron is back. So 58%. I just got a message telling me that. Whether that Le Pen or him anyway is nearly the same, but that guy is just... So, sorry. Yeah. So I was saying that sabotage, that got off track thinking about elections. Yeah.
I think for anyone who doesn't really conceptualize of finance or whatever very well, you can think of it very much in the same way as the actual physical things that are destroying the trees, like bulldozers or whatever. You can think of it the same way. It's like the engine that runs civilization, if that helps to think of it. The idea of growth is at the heart of debt itself. The only reason growth exists in this world, or the infinite growth paradigm, is because of ever increasing debt, which comes from, a long, long time ago, the start of usury, giving out loans with interest. That means that someone then has to go out and make more than you originally loaned to them in the first place, which means growth goes on forever. But yeah, it's like to think about it as sabotaging the financial system is sort of the same way as putting sand into a bulldozer's engine or something like that. And that was the idea behind the debt strike. I thought it was a complete pipe dream because obviously everyone's very, very committed to the chains in their head, right? The idea that I must pay back my debts and all of this stuff. This is so entrenched in our culture. I don't think it's at all possible that one guy making a video would make people completely go against that worldwide. But the idea was still spot on, I think, and
The idea was not to default. The idea was to sow the seed that you could do it, which was
right.
kind of, giving a doubt suddenly. It was not actually, and so I think that was psychologically quite clever.
Yeah, and I think that's where it best serves all of us or anyone else who thinks about that, is to just think about it that way, that you don't need to actually pay those things back. They're not right in the first place. That a whole idea of debt and everything is an illusion. It's basically, modern slavery, and it's the chains in your head that you need to throw off. But yeah, the practicality of it, I mean, I don't see that happening at all. But it's the right. It all ties into the same sort of right way to think about things, I think, because doing that is sort of right action without any idea of where it goes. If everyone was to do that tomorrow, no one would have any idea what would happen to the financial markets or the economy at large, or any sort of geopolitical repercussions or anything. But yeah.
Well, yes, Sophia, thanks for that reminder. It was not, the plot was just to make the threat. So the threat is almost as good as the deed. Threatening not to pay would have shaken the boots of the oligarchs. But I don't think that was fully understood by the audience that Lord Hugh tried to reach, that it was just going to be a threat. And then I could also see where people would be even afraid of just making that threat, like writing a letter to my student loan company saying I plan not to pay starting on November 5. I mean, that's probably scary enough for some people. They'll be on some blacklist, and people care too much about their credit rating. The other thing too is thanks to MM for reminding us about our intrinsic tendency to repay debts. In fact, there were some videos that Lord Hugh displayed that primates really do keep track of that, like in terms of, like those, I don't know if they were monkeys, they were trying to get the mites off each other, and they kind of knew who wasn't that doing that to me back. So it's not just, it's really probably very hard to erase in our heads about these debts, because that's how we are as primates, and we've bought into the system of economic debt.
Yeah, it's a natural tendency that's been hijacked by people who've used it for their own purposes. So for a long, long time, people have used that idea that you need to pay that debt back, and then added interest on top of that, which is sort of the real icing on the cake when it comes to sort of screwing over, population of the world, essentially. But what was I going to say? Oh, it's sort of the same thing, though. The idea that you are responsible for paying back your debt. You have this accounted for. You have a literal number value assigned to how much you have to pay back and how much you are responsible for and whatnot. That's the exact same thinking behind the carbon budget and things like this. The system tries to make you feel as though you are personally responsible for these actions, for these whatever you owe. You have such and such a personal carbon budget that you are allowed to stay within the confines of, and all of this stuff. It's all ways of putting chains on people, and so to rid yourself of that line of thinking, I think, is imperative for any kind of moving forward in any of this. To not think of yourself as having to account for every little bit of carbon you use on a daily basis or whatever. That's just not the way anyone can function. If you look back at sort of the people who lived harmoniously with nature, no one was doing carbon accounting back then, right? They weren't keeping track of all of this stuff or writing it down on a stone wall or anything like that. The way to live with it is to not use that calculating, cost accounting part of your head. That's sort of that's the key. Yeah, they yeah, they didn't know how to count, exactly. Yeah, that's where so many people, I think, go wrong, is they look at this alien cortex problem and they try to come up with an alien cortex solution for it, and it's the wrong way to think about it, I think.
All right. We've been over an hour. Anything else you guys want to add? Any other questions?
Nothing over here. The only thing I would say is I just feel it's not really, and I think most people here are on the same page, but I really don't see any point in talking about things like XR and stuff like that. I view it as a waste of time when it comes to these particular discussions, and there's so much rich stuff that people in this group have in common and can talk about, rather than people who are just doing their own little ego trips for social media and stuff. So I don't know. If there's anything I would say, I'd say it's just not worth even getting into in future discussions. They're not going to do anything. They don't have any real aim other than self-serving ones. So I don't know. I just think we can use this time that we do have to talk about much more important things than that. Yeah, if you're on the Going South says it's only interesting in terms of example of approach. If you're all on the same page that that's just a foolish way of doing things, then you can drop that as a subject, I think. And I think everyone here's on the same page. Just my 2 cents.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good point. XR is only example of approach, and they did teach us as Hugh also mentioned, that they're fragmented, and we kind of want to, we see that what we want to avoid. So what we see in XR is kind of a warning and something to avoid. So, but yeah, of course, moving forward, I'm sure we'll have other, we have a lot more to talk about.
I was just going to ask if everyone saw the post by Professor Charles, I think Nichols, where he expressed what his area of interest is, which is the Byzantine Empire, and how it was able to survive for 500 years by basically shrinking. So that is another approach society could have if we had enough time, right? How to shrink, and this concept of degrowth. Is there even any interest in us talking about those principles, or that movement of degrowth? Or do people think that at this time the only agency we have is preparing ourselves, as we've been trying to, mentally, spiritually, psychologically? I don't know. I just thought it might be a topic for the future.
Yeah, I agree. We have talked actually about this already, and I think we will approach this subject again and again. I mean, it's crucial. It's much more central than any form of activism that we have talked about there. I'm really sorry, but my dog is jumping on me because he wants to go out. So I'm probably going to have to drop out very soon from the meeting unless. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, we could probably explore those topics again, probably also for next meeting. Yeah, Bob saying degrowth personal in general, degrowth and simplifying our lives are interesting as topics. So yeah, next time we post on Reddit, we can talk about this again. Yeah. So if there's nothing else, we can fall still now, as we did in previous meetings. And we'll end it with Om Paramatmane Nama Iti. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'll stop the recording.
Thank you.